Welcome back to Nalini Podcast International. In this series, we talk to cybersecurity experts all over the world to discuss cyber domain of the war, make new connections for Ukrainian information security community, and learn from colleagues abroad. Today, we have Katie Moussouris, who is currently CEO and founder of Luta Security. And Katie has spent more than 20 years in the industry professionally, and I guess less professionally before that. Her work included multiple industry-leading initiatives, starting with Microsoft Vulnerability Research, launching Microsoft's first bug bounty program, co-authoring international standards on vulnerability disclosure and vulnerability handling processes, which is just amazing if you just think about it, that we have a standard for that. And she also worked with U.S. Department of Defense, where she led the launch of the very first U.S. government bug bounty program, Hack the Pentagon, allowing hackers to legally probe security of governmental computer networks, which is crazy, especially if it's U.S. government. And Katie also supports a number of social causes of gender and economic equity through her foundation, Pay Equity Now. If there's anything else to add, Katie, feel free. But Katie, welcome, and we're excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. The only thing I'm going to add is that Scappy the cat, who I've warned you is going to join us, he's trying to close my laptop right now. He's literally rubbing his face on it. So if the camera goes like this, it's because I'm holding it because he's trying to sabotage this recording. I'm just telling you right now.
Vlad, I think we need to add another thread to critical infrastructure threats that we have
the threat model will be updated in the background. Katie, the first question I'm forced to ask: how did you come up with such a cool name for the cat?
Well, okay, so Scappy, my cat, is about 17 years old. Scappy, the Python fuzzer, is about 18 or 19 years old. And, it's in the category of fuzzers called dumb fuzzers. And this is a dumb fuzzy cat. So, the name was natural. He also finds a lot of bugs. He hunts bugs. It was a natural name. And I'm petting him over here because I'm trying to distract him. But he is very disruptive, exactly like a dumb fuzzer. So this is perfect name for this cat.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Scappy. That's nice. That's really nice. Thank you for the explanation, because I'm a big fan of a tool. And now I'm also a big fan of your cat.
Yep.
Speaking of disruptive things. Oh, go ahead.
No, I get Scappy stickers every time I see the makers of Scappy at conferences, and I bring them back for the cat. He doesn't understand it's for him. These are your stickers. Anyway.
I'm pretty sure he thinks you're chatting with him right now. So he's like, oh, I'm in the middle of attention. So
he is. He's getting attention.
But
he's
speaking of disruptive things,
he's holding me hostage, is what's happening. I call him my supervisor. He's my supervisor.
like any cat. My parents had a cat for almost 20 years. So yeah, definitely familiar feeling. I was going to say, speaking of disruptive things, right? There is part of your career I didn't mention, but basically, I think everyone either knows it, or if not, they will Google it and find out. But I guess I wanted to ask, what do you think are the main challenges, basically difference between InfoSec challenges between the times you were at stake and now? Are there any differences? Are there any, did something fundamentally change? Or this is similar, fairly similar? And if not, then, what do you think is the biggest change?
Well, so first, it was a great time to be joining the InfoSec, career trajectory back in the early 2000s with At Stake. It was formed by my friends from the Loft, who I had known since the late 80s, early 90s. So it was really cool to work with each other, especially when we were all young. So what has changed? One, we're not young anymore. But with that experience, we've noticed patterns, emerging in our industry. We've also noticed, some things remain the same, right? Attack surface reduction is still one of the best ways to deal with any kind of emerging threat. It doesn't matter whether it was 20 years ago or today. We're always telling people to reduce their attack surface. And I would also say that, a lot more people and a lot more organizations are open to working with hackers today than they were back then. Back then, you had to be a professional penetration tester, which you know, us in our 20s, I can't imagine how much more unprofessional we could possibly have been as hackers. But back then, you know, the banks wouldn't hire you unless you came from a company. Now organizations are open to individual hackers reporting bugs. Sometimes they pay them, sometimes they don't, but you know, just the openness has changed. And I think that's a good thing. And that's through the work of many, many people, you know, not just myself advocating for vulnerability disclosure and bug bounty programs, but it's been, you know, sort of a shift over the last decade or so. Organizations realizing that they can't secure everything by doing a checklist. They do need some hackers to tell them the truth, and we're here to tell them the truth. So that much has not changed.
Awesome.
So I guess would it be correct?
If I may,
also go ahead.
I just wanted to add that if you want to learn more about this fundamental era in the hacking history and all the precursors to the current state of InfoSec industry that Katie just elegantly scratched on the surface, there is a book by Joseph Mann. It's available in Ukrainian now. It's Cult of the Dead Cow. So just get it and read about it in full detail. Not full as detail, but you will certainly get a thing or two from the book. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that book is,
to my embarrassment, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that book is great. And Joe Mann is a good friend of mine, and I'm glad that he chronicled and captured some of that history. You know, it's a lot of stories in that book about, you know, a simpler time of hacking. And I think a lot of the same spirit of hacking is still alive today. Well, we're still alive, right? So there's that, but for now. But it's also, I think the book really goes into some of the fundamental like ethical questions that we had to wrestle with, right? You hold so much power, and as everything becomes more digitized and everything becomes more connected, the more hackers' power in society actually grew. And deciding what to do with that knowledge, what to do with the bugs that you found. I mean, these were kind of existential questions. It was like Frodo in Lord of the Rings trying to hand Galadriel the ring, and she's like, I could become this evil and terrible, you know, beautiful and terrible as the dawn, or I can hand back the ring of power. And this is the question we wrestle with every single time we find a bug is, what am I going to do with this bug? And I think that book really dives into some of that early, you know, wrestling with how do we function knowing that what we can do, and also with people not really listening to us, you know, at the time. And what are the warnings we want to get out there, and what good can we do with our skills, with our powers? So I think people are always wrestling with what can we do with our time on Earth, right? And I don't know, the book is a lot more, to me anyway, and maybe it's because it's about me and my friends, you know, that I feel very much like it's such a great illustration of not just the time, but the ethical choices that we make, you know, with technology.
Yeah, another thing that struck me, and like to my embarrassment. Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, maybe as you mentioned, Ruslan, Katie is the co-author of International Standards for Vulnerability Disclosure. I just wanted to thank you exclusively for that, because we took it as a basis for our national, formalization of bug bounty processes in the government. And I'm like a member of a task group that took this assignment. So yeah, it's a very well designed document. The second edition, at least, I didn't catch up with the first one, but the fresh one, it's kind of cool. And it's, you know, it's you most probably recognize in full the momentum that you gave to this industry, because just imagine how easy it is for me to convince my ideological and bureaucratic opponents all around the corners of the government when I argue from the pedestal of an international standard, you know? Mm-hmm. Right? So all your work that you have done, all the experience that you have accumulated and then put into the document, it now bears fruit. and it's much easier for the people who come after you to do the same job in other places.
That's really good to hear. And it was, the document was the work of many people over many years, and I was lucky that I was at a place that supported my work there, because to be an editor of international standards, you effectively have to work for a company that's a member of the international body to even have a seat at the table. So there was a lot of weird stuff about me taking a job at Microsoft when I did. I mean, I had been a Linux developer. I wasn't, I didn't really hack on Microsoft. I hacked on Linux and stuff. And so me taking a job there, I knew what I wanted to do was try to move the biggest software company in the world. If you can move that brick of a company, even 1 inch, the whole world gets to move with it. And so I was just really lucky that I was there at the time. And I thought it was going to be short. I thought I was going to go in, make some red line changes, fix up their crappy document and leave. But it took like 9 years of my life, I'm not kidding you, to like finalize those versions and everything. And a lot changed in my life in that span of time. But I think what stayed the same was that, like you and a lot of people, they just needed something that was blessed by the international community of experts and standard makers to make it okay for them to do it in their organization. Because otherwise it was just too scary. It was like, I think a lot of people were like, invite hackers to hack us. What are you, crazy? And it's like, hackers are already hacking you. You're just inviting the friendly ones, and everything. So having the standard to legitimize it, I think that really resonates with a lot of people. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you just start to listen to them instead of dismissing them and ignoring. But yeah, I was just gonna say that to my embarrassment, I just read the book last night on the flight from New York. But what struck me the most is that, yeah, Vlad is like, what? How do I know this guy?
Finally, you did it.
Well, better late than never.
Congrats.
Better late than never. To my excuse, I work more on like software engineering versus like traditional security or pen test and stuff like that. So I always put that as an excuse. But anyway, what struck me the most is that your generation kind of hit that period uniquely, which no generation will ever do again, where you were kind of, if not ahead, but with the technology developing. Because if you come to the field now, right, so much has happened, so much is happening right now, you kind of catching up, you feel this, feeling of missing out, if anything, right? But back then, there was nothing essentially, right? There was just a little bit of technology developing, connectivity wasn't there. And so to me, it also seems like the thing that changed the most since, back to the original question, the communication between people, between companies and hackers, and generally between the industry and other fields. So it's just amazing to see this progress being done, and I can't even imagine how amazing it is to be, the witness of that, for you to be following it for all this time. So that's amazing. But now, as we touched the topic of vulnerabilities and standards, we'll also want to move to questions about, I guess, focus more on your work with governments, because as you know, right now Ukraine is at a state of war, and during this time, all the threats, all the issues that may be happening in cyber realm kind of multiplied, I don't know, 10, 100,000 times. So I guess we could start with, is there any advice you could give on what to focus the most on, to boost up security of critical businesses and state infrastructure, how to work with the government on this as well?
I think, well, first of all, what's happening in Ukraine is beyond imagination and beyond nightmares. And I'm so sorry for what's happening there. It's in terms of your question about cybersecurity, I think, all organizations, all governments, critical infrastructure need to work on things that unfortunately they are the basics, but they are not basic to implement, right? You need resources, you need people who understand how your systems work in order to secure the most critical of your assets. No organization is going to be perfectly secure at all times. It's really a matter of, maintenance, asset management, a lot of really boring stuff, honestly. This is the boring stuff, but it's kind of like preventing cavities by brushing and flossing every day. It's the dental hygiene of security that people, it's boring, but you need skilled workers to do it. So I think, maintaining patch levels is boring, but it's absolutely necessary. Having people who can run scans against your network, whether they're people that you have internally or people you hire or strangers on the internet that you invite, just to let you know where you've missed something. I mean, those are some things that organizations usually start with nothing. Even governments can start with nothing, no people to deal with security. They're just dealing with keeping the systems up and running. And this is actually true in the United States as well. It's not unique to Ukraine. It's not unique to any country where you have things like gas pipelines and other critical infrastructure where you probably have one IT person and they're not a security person. So we have a workforce shortage, but we also have this problem. I think you were touching on it earlier. You made me think about it when you said, my generation grew up when there was nothing, like we were growing up with the technology, as it was being put in place. And there's so much to learn. Well, there's so many new people that don't get an opportunity because most cybersecurity jobs say you need to have 10 years of experience. How do you get that experience if you can never get that job? And then we have organizations, critical infrastructure and governments that need workers and can't hire them, right? So we have this gap. We have a cyber workforce gap. And what I think is that we need to get more creative and go back to actually how we got these jobs. How did we get these jobs? There were no jobs, right? We had to create them. We had to create these roles. I think there's room for governments, critical infrastructure to have their one IT person take on more and more cybersecurity responsibilities, but also bringing in less experienced people and having them learn in the job. This is kind of what we had to do in the first place, right? And we invented this field while we were doing it. It's like building the railroad, putting the tracks of the railroad right before the train that you're running really, really fast. This is where we are right now. So maybe it's a convoluted answer to your question, but it's about maintaining cybersecurity hygiene, trying to get more workers in and building a pipeline of workers so that new workers can gain experience looking over the shoulders of the keyboard, of the older workers with more experience. And I think we need to challenge ourselves to find less traditional pathways, because I didn't go to college for this. Nobody I know who does this, really for a living did it through formal education. There's more formal education now in cyber than ever. I don't see anybody coming out with a master's of information security and being able to take on, a nation state threat. I see hackers like me who figured it out, starting to build tools and build protection. And I think the spirit of that needs to continue.
And the training that you just touched briefly, does it really work? Because just in terms of organizational development, there are two ways to transfer knowledge, right? You can either go to a training, get certified, pass the test, all this kind of usual stuff, and then put it on your resume. And with this CV, you will be more or less capable to get a job. Yeah, so you just pass the firewall, pass the HR filter, as we call it, right? But you will never get the tacit knowledge this way. This looking over the shoulder, it will not come to you without experience. You can be a lone wolf and, I don't know, hunt the bugs or whatever, but or do some very deep and specific kind of research, like go down to some very specific thing and do it, be the best in the world in it, right? But these kind of people are not capable to take responsibility for I don't know, government security, for instance, right? So what you're saying can it be summed up with something like just lower the bar and put some people, bring some people in, take them on the crew, and just try to build something with these resources?
Well, I mean, that's honestly, that's what I've found does work, right? We take more experienced people. And this was true even back at Stake. You would have, a senior penetration testers. We would go on an engagement and we would bring the junior pen testers with us, right? So they would do some things, but we would teach them more, either more hacking skills, more techniques, but more customer facing skills and things like how do you write a report so that you can communicate the risk so that the organization actually takes action. Like that's as important as doing the hacking in a lot of cases. You can hack yourself all the way through government's internal infrastructure. But if you can't articulate what it is that you did and what they need to do to secure it, you've basically just, taken a selfie of hacking.
That's it. No change, yeah.
Right. So it has worked. And something else, my company does cybersecurity specifically around vulnerability disclosure and bug bounty internal handling procedures. And what we found is that there aren't that many people who know how to do that process, right? I call it sort of the security 1%, these organizations that have huge cybersecurity teams and budgets and different specializations within their cybersecurity team. That's a tiny fraction of the world. It's a few major companies and it's zero governments. No governments have the cyber capabilities right now, in terms of organized defense as, let's say, Microsoft, Apple, Google. Those are among like what I would call the companies that basically had to build this over the last 20 or so years. So what I'm saying is the ability to train people depends on you having sort of enough organizational experts, but also organizational room to bring in junior people. And you have to deliberately make room for them, because no, you can't put a junior person on a critical task and leave them alone. You need a senior person with them. They need to be shadowing the senior person for at least some period of time. And we do that a lot actually with the skills that we teach, because hardly any organizations have these people already. So you can't hire them. You can't hire them already ready to do this job. You have to teach them how. And we teach people how to do vulnerability disclosure inside an organization. We teach them how to digest the bugs that are being fed into them through bug bounty programs and everything. And that's a learned skill.
Yeah, I guess you could learn it's in school, I guess, if the programs were mature enough, but still you need some experience at least. And also a lot of cybersecurity programs are not, I would say, not that mature. Like they don't really teach that stuff very efficiently. And yeah, in my mind, this form of apprenticeship always has been the most effective one. So I'm a little bit disappointed that very few companies actually invest in doing that. I know Vlad's company does. Obviously, top security companies do, but other than that, it's harder to get, I would say, to get exposure to people willing to teach you, or rather the companies willing to invest in people. So we definitely want to encourage that as well.
It's a very simple idea that takes time to understand on the organizational and cultural level. So experts breed by binary fission. Okay, you take one, you attach a mentee to him or her. It takes some time, yeah. So there is some doubling time, and you just breed them like bacteria, right? So after some time, you get two experts. Okay, so it just works like that. And the point in time that, like the moment when organizational manager who is tasked with this kind of work gets it, from there it goes more or less smoothly. You just do not attach too many mentees to an expert, right? Because each mentee requires about 20 to 30% of time just for tasking, controlling, supervision, all this kind of stuff, right? So you cannot attach two mentees to an expert for an expert to stay efficient. So it works like that. Maybe it depends on the body of knowledge, but in security, it's more or less like that. So yeah, so I completely agree. This is something that works. It's slow. It has huge doubling time, but it has it. And when it's reached, you have two experts. Job done.
Yeah, and I think more governments, more organizations need that pipeline. I mean, my own government is having trouble hiring enough cybersecurity workers, and they're trying to, do these other creative programs to train people who are already in the government. That's another big thing, is that you need to be able to train the people that you already have, and encourage them and give them the room in their job role to take on new responsibilities. And I would say that, if someone is sitting in an organization and they are the lonely one IT person or very small team, this is an area where, if they want to branch out into cybersecurity, it's a perfect opportunity to just raise their hand and say, no one's doing this here. I would like to try it. I would like to install, these systems for sensing attacks. I would like to do threat hunting, whatever it is. But I think that organizations need to make room for it, and make room for their existing people to take on more and more cybersecurity roles, and provide training opportunities and job opportunities for them.
I'm also very interested to learn about your experience, if you had something similar. So I'll describe the scene right now. But basically, I think U.S. government is a little bit different in the sense that it's very, very established. I guess if we compare to Ukraine would be maybe like 1800s, U.S. government, like 25, 30 years after revolution. So the government, they develop right now, so they're a little bit different. So Ukrainian government sometimes is actually trying to, go ahead of the time, and maybe get a little bit too hypey, and they do introduce some very modern features, I would say, right? So I'm not sure if you heard about Dia, which is an app in Ukraine where you can do a lot of things. Basically, it's like a lot of government services put in a mobile app. You can even put your ID in there and just, present it from your phone, and the law enforcement can verify it without having to carry the card or the paper with you and stuff like that. We had a lot of discussions about it on this podcast as well, regarding like concerns about privacy and all of that good stuff. And we also did have a huge leak of data, of course, after a while from that app, but nonetheless, it's there, and a lot of Ukrainians do use it. And so shortly before, maybe during,
allegedly had a huge
right, but they did have a bug bounty program, though I guess Vlad can speak more to this. Initially, it was very...
We still have it.
Oh, they still have it. But initially, as I remember, things like API was out of scope, right? So it was very unprepared bug bounty program.
I can elaborate on that. So I wouldn't say that it just had API out of scope. It was formally out of scope, but they added it to scope within, I don't know, first 2 hours of the program. So they were doing it without much preparation, but they had some support stuff online at all times to be ready to approve changes to the program, and they run it on background, so it was very well coordinated. So they did it as they do everything. It's like a reckless startup mode. So they have fewer constraints. They are much more flexible, and this is how they basically succeed. Yeah, so because they reach their goals, in the end they create stuff that works. Maybe it's not super secure, but no one has proven otherwise, like that point. Yeah, so it kind of works, and the bug bounty is still active. It has some reports. It doesn't have P1s, I guess, yet, still, surprisingly. So at least some indicators confirm that that might be a more or less secure application.
There was no huge low-hanging fruit. But basically, sorry to interrupt, but basically where I was leading is my understanding that in your work, Katie, right, you had to work more against like this huge machine and try to drive it forward. Versus in Ukraine, sometimes they're happy to jump forward. It's just they kind of need a little bit of guidance, and they didn't ask for it. So there are some issues along the way. But please tell me, like, what your experience was there? Was it different?
How did you do that?
How I described?
Is there a silver bullet to it? Is it a combination of your skills, or because it still sounds amazing? You know, there is a person who first did it in Microsoft and then did it for DoD. It's like fantastic.
Well, I mean, honestly, all of it was slow like a glacier, and not like slow like a glacier melting right now, because it's happening really fast, like slow like a glacier moving, right? It was like 3 years of conversations from the time that I was at Microsoft to the time we launched Hack the Pentagon, you know? So it took a very long time. And every time I was in DC, I would always say to my friends, you know, in various government agencies, say, hey, you know, I'm going to be in DC for this reason. Do you want to meet up? And every time there were more questions, more exploration of the idea. And then suddenly, when the US government decided to do it, it had advised them, don't do a bug bounty first. That's crazy. Do a vulnerability disclosure program first, because you have no idea, you know, what you're going to encounter and everything. And they said, yeah, but you know, we really want to embrace the future, and the future is bug bounty. And so they went straight to a bug bounty. And you actually see them still kind of struggling to get out of that, almost the pilot mode of bug bounty, because that was how they started everything. But anyway, I think what you were asking is about that app, and you know, whether or not it seems like doing a bug bounty is a good way to secure that app. I would say that, you know, it is one of the good ways, but the other ways, and I hope that this has been done also, is to hire professional pen testers. The reason is the coverage that you get from bug bounties is different from what you get from professional pen testers. Professional pen testers do have, you know, a methodology, not that bug bounty hunters don't, but they have a methodology that's oriented around coverage, as opposed to bug bounty hunters that are oriented around coverage that is likely to get them a reward. Right? That's a different thing. And there may be a lot of lower severity bugs that won't be as interesting to a bug bounty hunter, but strung together might be a lot more interesting, you know, and would take some more time from a skilled professional pen tester. So hopefully you're having a combination of these things happening, and good code reviewers reviewing the architecture. One reason I would say not to rely on the bug bounty is that when you said it was a mobile application, right? It's mobile app. Is that right?
Yeah, it's basically a mobile app and an API that is gateway to a bunch of registries and other public services that the government puts out.
Right. So the mobile app component of it, and even the APIs, those are a little bit outside the skill set of a typical bug bounty hunter. Typical bug bounty hunters are much more commonly skilled in web app pen test techniques. It's a lot faster, lower barrier to entry to find good bugs in web. And so a lot of bug bounty hunters naturally have really only skilled up in that area. So what we find is that there are very few people with the kind of skills just kind of randomly out there doing bug bounty. Why? Because if they already have those skills, they're probably getting paid for them, and they don't need to gamble with their time and those skills doing a bug bounty. Because a bug bounty, you know, as you know, only the first person who comes in with the bug gets paid. So you might find the same bug as someone else, do the same work, but you get nothing and they get everything. And the other thing is that it takes a while, right? And you don't know how much you're going to get paid. And sometimes the organization doesn't understand the bug, and you have to take a lot of time explaining it to them, maybe even creating proof of concept over and over. It's a lot of work. It's not just the bug report. So what we try to do is we actually, when we spot a researcher in a bug bounty program that we help manage, we spot a researcher with a talent that's outside the normal bug bounty hunter skill set, we usually offer them a penetration testing contract. And the reason for doing that, it's like, why do that if they're already bug bounty hunting for you? Why not just pay for individual bugs? Because they probably have higher skills, ability to write tools, ability to find bugs in a more efficient way. And it's actually win-win. The organization still gets that person's bugs. That person gets paid a guaranteed amount for a guaranteed amount of work. And everybody is a lot happier. So it's not just bug bounty that you should be looking at, but some of these other complementary models. And the fact of the matter is understanding the skills of who who responds to a bug bounty versus who responds to a professional penetration test. That's going to be important for getting good coverage.
That was very insightful. Also, I was super surprised to hear, super surprised to hear that even the US government wanted to jump into bug bounty program, because I thought that they would try to push it away as hard as they can. But I guess all governments are alike. So sometimes they wanna get on hype and do that quickly. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
It took Katie 3 years for them to get it. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question about like this coverage, right? So how to estimate the coverage here, right? That you did enough penetration testing about bounties, because like this de-application, it's kind of, a very disruptive feature. It's like, very rapid digitalization that Ukraine is doing. So it's like new services. So it's like a ratio or coverage that you need to achieve is should be much greater, or any kind of, like rules of thumb that you have for it.
So what was the question? Exactly?
Yeah, so basically how to estimate that you have enough bounties and enough penetration testing done for such,
okay. So how do you estimate, essentially, how do you estimate that you've done enough from a security assurance standpoint? Okay, so that's a hard one to measure. Honestly, it's almost a philosophical measurement, and I'm going to explain why, right? So all software is going to have bugs. No matter how much you try to find all of them, you're never going to find all of them. If it's of a certain size and complexity, you're not going to find all the bugs. So the best way to measure, did I do enough coverage, is one, to see what are the numbers of bug collisions, as in the same bug being found by multiple bug hunters. That indicates sort of a level of maturity, right? Because if, let's say, a ton of bug bounty hunters come in with the same bug report, that means it's easily discoverable. That means you should have found it yourself. That means you missed a step in terms of your own internal security. And then what you can do in the future is you can actually measure over time. What you want to see is fewer and fewer bugs being shaken out of your code by whoever is finding it, whether it's penetration testers or bug bounty hunters or both. Fewer and fewer bugs, but less severe and more complex, right? You don't want the simple bugs and a whole lot of them. That indicates that you missed a lot of steps in your security development lifecycle, and you need to, train your developers more, run your own tests, like that kind of thing. So maybe it's not exactly an answer to your question of when do you know how much you've done is enough. It's more of an evolution. You're taking your temperature at different baselines and you're trying to improve against yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I do have a second part of the question. Let me try to rephrase, right? So in terms of this, state infrastructure, like, and such, very sensitive applications, right, which has access to lots of data, do you raise the bar, right, in terms of like how much testing you're doing? Or like should like these governments like raise the bar? Okay, we need to invest much more than business doing.
So first of all, Scappy has joined us. I told you he was going to come. He is here. So, I would say that, look, there's an initial investment in trying to write the code securely in the first place. And there's a lot of things you can do of bringing in experts while you're still designing the code, you're designing the application, and while you're writing it. And then after that, in terms of hiring, professional penetration testers and then opening it up for bug bounties, it's not a matter of how much money you throw at it. It's really about whether or not, you've actually looked at the attack surface and gone in depth and adequate coverage for what could possibly be attacked. So done your threat modeling and everything like that. So I don't know if that's a better answer to your question, but Scappy can give you an answer also.
Actually mentioned threat modeling. So maybe that could be explained in a little bit more detail. So if you have a higher stakes situation, an application that demands more attention, you just do your threat modeling more thoroughly and accept more threats. Basically, you just lower the bar of acceptance of a threat. Yeah, and something that would be negligible for a commercial application becomes an issue, becomes a valid threat, because you are thinking compliance, you're thinking privacy, you're thinking all this kind of stuff that you would maybe avoid thinking about in the first year of your startup? You know, so you just mentioned threat modeling. I think it's a good pivotal point where you basically can define what needs to be tested and to what extent, and in this way drive this process correctly.
Yeah, and in terms of threat modeling, obviously protecting security, protecting privacy of data, those are the kinds of things as what would an attacker want to do? What would they want to access? And then you start looking for ways that you can make it very hard for the attacker to gain their objective, right? But one big thing here is that, all countries, I think, are exploring the ideas of electronic voting. And, it makes my heart stop when I think about it, given the state of cybersecurity. And I remember talking to they're doing research into trying to create mobile apps for online voting. And I was talking to the technical people about their threat model, about their security model. And, they were very earnest. They were very earnest, and they had done some work, but it was like only on the standalone application, not on the ecosystem in which it's going to exist, right? So I was starting to ask them questions like, are you doing signed updates? How are you delivering those updates to the software? And they were like, oh, well, it's going over HTTPS. And I was like, yes, but are the binary packages signed? And they were like, no, but it's only going from here to here. And I'm like, no. So your threat model is flawed, thinking that your app is only ever going to communicate with your servers. That's your first assumption is wrong. It's going to exist on people's phones of all different levels of security on the phone, and everything. And if you're expecting votes to be counted from these devices that are probably not secure, you're missing a huge part of your threat model, right? So I think organizations have to think about not just the application, but what are the threats in the environment in which it's going to be installed? And I think the app that you're talking about has the same issues, right? It's going to be installed on people's phones, and people's phones vary. And even the manufacturers of operating systems of the phones, they have trouble keeping up with applying patches, to down level versions of the phone. So you can imagine how complicated it's going to be for that app as it starts to try to provide, regular updates.
I'm glad you mentioned the voting. I'm glad you mentioned the voting because, guys, I don't know whether you are aware, we had already 2 test drive votes. It's still just collecting opinions, so it's more of a questionnaire, not the actual online vote, but it's still protected by qualified signatures. And the first one was about a couple of them were about what's the next postal stamp the post office needs to issue regarding all the war topic. But there was one serious one collecting opinions of the public about whether Ukrainians should be allowed to carry firearms. And it's not like voting yet, but still it affects whether the draft law enters the Rada, enters the parliament, and at what speed. So it's kind of voting. It affects the political process. So the stakes are raising high, and I think one day they will get there. We will actually have some online voting.
Yeah, so exactly. It's not only about the voting itself. It's also like polls like this that actually do have a tremendous effect.
Mm-hmm.
And with DIA, it's I don't know. We were discussing this.
We can spend another hour on that, but let's maybe get to another point.
Yeah, my thought was that basically sometimes you just have to go with the flow because you don't have another choice. Because I guess humanity always balances between like the risks and and the benefits that they get from technology and anything else, just like we had with nuclear weapon, just like we'll have with these apps, and God forbid the electronic voting that we might as well have pretty soon. But anyway, unfortunately, Ukrainian government, and I think many governments, they sometimes are super happy, you know, to be very progressive in one field, but at the same time, not as much in other fields, right? So this is the app that they kind of market heavily. They want to present that it's secure, so they invest time and effort into that. But there is a lot of, you know, critical infrastructure that they are not as interested to surface vulnerabilities in, whether it's I don't know, a power plant or you know, some website of like regional governments somewhere, you know, in suburban Ukraine or whatnot, and they would never listen. They don't even have a formal program to listen to reports about vulnerability in this kind of scenarios. And so I don't know if you heard about it. In Ukraine, we have Ukrainian Cyber Alliance, which is essentially a group of a united group of few underground hacking groups in Ukraine, which kind of united since 2014. And first, they, of course, you know, spent some effort to hack some Russian assets, but at the same time, they were focusing on trying to find vulnerabilities in Ukrainian infrastructure, governments, and whatnot, and report them. And of course, when they would not get a response from the government, they started an initiative for responsible disclosure, where they do not do the responsible way. They just publish the vulnerability, hoping that it will get like public attention and cause some response. So basically, they went old school, right? What a lot of folks that you know did back in, I don't know, 80s, 90s, and so on.
You're missing
So,
one important
yeah.
detail. They do it on Facebook. The worst possible way.
Okay.
Worst possible place to do it. But just for your information, maybe Facebook for Ukrainians is what Twitter is for everybody else.
Yeah, for better or for worse. But do you think such approach is still effective? Would you recommend, you know, changing it to something else? What are your thoughts on this?
I absolutely think that approach is effective. It's essentially the approach that we all had to take at some point or another. And here's the funny thing about it. Companies would like to call that, you know, irresponsible, right? They like to call researchers irresponsible if they drop 0-day after they've warned you, right? They've warned you and warned you. They've tried to get your attention. You're not doing anything about it. So fine, we're going to release it publicly and drop the details. They call that irresponsible, but who's really being irresponsible? It's the ones who aren't listening, right? They're the ones with the bugs. They're the ones being irresponsible. Honestly, this was something that it used to surprise people when I worked at Microsoft that I still had the stance. But I wrote Microsoft's policy specifically to have that stance, and I explained it the way that, you know, it was basically when I was at Microsoft, I wrote the policy to how do we receive bugs? How do we disclose bugs that we find? And how do we coordinate bugs that maybe we're a part of it somehow, you know, but we're one piece of it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's multi-party supply chain vulnerability disclosure. So all three of those roles we defined, and we actually defined when we would drop 0-day. And the trigger for Microsoft was if we see exploitation of a bug, you know, that we found in somebody else's stuff, we'll drop 0-day on them. That we will, you know, and everything, because you have to provide guidance to the world. Now, when individual or a group of hackers do it, it's considered like a little bit edgy or whatnot, but it's the same exact principle. They are warning the world, or they are warning the affected users. When the party who's supposed to be responsible doesn't take action, it's up to the hackers to take action and warn the public. And yes, absolutely, I believe that approach works. And you know, how organizations and governments can avoid that happening to them is they have to find a way to listen to these vulnerability reports and take action on them. And if they don't take action, they need to be prepared for, you know, hackers to let the public know, and then they have to deal with the public, you know, not just the hackers, but the public as well. So for me, I think it just makes sense for organizations to start processing these reports and dealing with them like adults, you know what I mean? And if they if they don't want to do the dishes, okay, somebody's going to show all your dirty dishes.
But what do you
we should translate this and let everyone read in the
No,
comment.
we will do it. We will do it. We point a lot of people to this recording in the coming months. So I just wanted to clarify. I asked this question a few journalists who focus on the topic of vulnerability disclosure, hacking, InfoSec in general, but I finally have a chance to ask it to you because, yeah, obviously you have unprecedented experience in this field. Do you remember a case of a hacking collective, a hacking group, running full disclosure against their country's public infrastructure?
Well, I mean, going straight to full disclosure or attempting
no. This kind of edgy, responsible/irresponsible stuff. So first doing it privately, peer-to-peer, but when not finding peers to report or being not heard or being rejected, running full disclosure. Because the cases of doing that against the major vendors and the private companies are well described in literature, including, right? But I could not find a precedent for that on the private public level.
So one of the most interesting governments to look at from a vulnerability disclosure perspective is the Netherlands. The Dutch adopted the ISO standards, for vulnerability disclosure for their national program very early. I remember going to speak to them, I think in like 2010, the standards weren't even published yet, but I was explaining like, this is coming. And they said, oh, that looks interesting. We should do that. And they jumped on board and they formulated their own vulnerability disclosure program. Now, to your question about trying to report things privately and get them fixed and then disclosing them publicly if they don't get fixed. The Dutch government has actually defended hackers who have done this against corporations that didn't respond. So talk about a progressive government. One of the other cool things about the Dutch government was this was before Hack the Pentagon. Dutch government had like a private sort of like not for money bug bounty, but a bug bounty where they give you like swag that you could only get.
Yeah. T-shirts. Like, I hacked Dutch government and I got this lousy T-shirt or something.
Lousy T-shirt, exactly. So they had a sense of humor about it because they weren't paying money, but you could only get that T-shirt if you actually hacked the Dutch government. So they really had a lot of progressive ideas about it and embracing hackers. I think smaller countries understand that, one, they need to embrace the talent in the hacker community that they have at home, and to go after them and try to arrest them, for hacking is not going to help their national security, right? So I think a lot of smaller countries are looking for ways to support hackers and also support the mission of, just like the Dutch government did, of defending a hacker who tried to disclose, and then said, well, you're not doing your job to some corporation, and then the hacker was basically defended by the principles of the Dutch government. I thought that was really, really cool. One other government, not about disclosure and everything, but one other government I wanted to mention that all governments, I think, have learned a lot from in terms of defending in cyberspace is Estonia. So Estonia, they were under attack by the Russians in cyber before any of us really were aware that was going on in like such an organized way. And they've had to defend themselves with very little resources in terms of, oh, this is the cat. Oh my God. Did you see him he's trying to get on the keyboard and make this stop right now. This is what he's doing.
Time's up.
I know. He's like, that's
exactly. He's just letting us know, like, guys, we're almost out of time.
He's like, wrap it up with his tail. He's so mad right now. Anyway, but yeah, the Estonians can really teach us all quite a bit, in terms of defending against a powerful nation state and specifically Russia in cyberspace. And I just wanted to make sure, okay, he jumped down, Scabby jumped down. I just wanted to make sure to mention the Estonian government in terms of their incredible experience in cybersecurity, especially against Russia.
now I will throw this link to even more people because I'm a big fan. Dutch government does business in cybersecurity. I always put them as an example because their annual reports, the cybersecurity state of affairs in the government, and all this work they do in intelligence, of course, it's just self-explanatory, of course, but most people just do not know that these things are happening. But about Estonia, what do you think? Are we in the same position? Because they were all this drama around the bronze soldier and the Russian attacks as a result. They were strategically aimed at the pace of Estonian digitalization because they put a lot online, right? They made this government ID available abroad for e-residents. For example,
I'm an e-resident of Estonia. Yeah,
same
totally.
here.
Right.
So, do you think we are in a similar position because we had this progressive government that put a separate ministry for digitalization, and the guy who runs it is basically vice premier, so first vice premier for a second, right? So it was articulated as a strategic vision of this cabinet, right? So we must probably signal the same threat model, yeah, the same risk profile. So this is why we are cyber attacked like crazy. So we definitely need to learn from them because we have very similar histories.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I've been to a few different NATO events before the war and everything, and NATO and Cyber, they absolutely are learning from, from each other, but especially from the Estonian experience. And I think that is something that we need to recognize, is that just because a government is big or well funded or has a ton of people, or even in the US government case, even if that government literally funded the research that invented the original internet, doesn't matter. The state of where we are today depends on support, visionary leadership, and people actually investing in not just the cybersecurity of the government, but in growing the cybersecurity population. We need to grow more, essentially, people with the skills and talents to support all the technology that society runs on now. And it's not going to go backwards, right? We're not going to go backwards and go back to all paper, for all these government things.
Exactly.
And it wouldn't be efficient to do so. But I mean, even in things like from a military standpoint, I remember talking to, this was the head of US Cyber Command. So basically, looking at some of the different areas in technology that supports the military. So just navigation alone. Hardly anybody knows how to navigate using paper charts anymore, right? It's all done electronically and everything. And part of that loss is that you lose the, non-technical fallback,
resilience,
right?
Yeah.
But you gain so much more operational efficiency. And we just have to be able to grow in parallel with the operational efficiency we're gaining and gain that kind of cybersecurity efficiency as well. We're just way behind in gaining the cybersecurity efficiency to keep up with the operational efficiency we need. So yeah, we're all in this position right now where so much of the technology has grown faster than we can secure it. And I just think, small governments have an advantage in a lot of ways, right? You can move faster. You can make better decisions without the bureaucracy. The UK government is another great example. They consolidated a lot of their cybersecurity under NCSC a few years ago, and the United States, made CISA a few years ago, just trying to consolidate some of the cybersecurity operations and everything, even in a very large government, trying to concentrate those forces to honestly, it's to achieve more of that nimbleness and cut out most of the bureaucracy and have like a better cybersecurity outcome overall.
We try to not to make Skepi too mad, but since we really scratched this topic by now, what do you think in Ukraine? Obviously, there is a lot of defensive operations going on, but also some offensive, because this is a war after all. And basically, we want to ask, what's your thought on hacking back? And do you think this is in line with hacktivism culture? Is it ethical, you would say, both during the open war and also things like attack on power plants and whatnot without the open kind of full scale, just kinetic war? What do you think?
Well, that's a lot of questions in there. So I think,
sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, I think whatever Ukrainians need to do to defend the homeland, they should do. That's my opinion, and whatever that is, whatever is in your power to do. And to me, that's ethical, right? You're defending your home. What more ethics do you need? What more reason do you need to be able to defend yourself? And I think, in terms of going after specific targets, one thing is, I know that when cyber operations are happening from bigger countries, right, directed from bigger countries, a lot, and there's something going on that the individuals want to help out, right, and volunteer. The thing I always tell them is that, look, unless you're actually part of a command, and doing a mission, it is kind of dangerous for you to be there messing around on your own, because you could actually derail the real mission, so it's better if you're working, as part of some kind of official way to go about doing these things, more so just because you don't want to interfere with the operation you're trying to help in that way. And so what I tell people, a lot of people were saying, we want to volunteer to hack for the Ukrainians. And I was like, here's the thing, volunteer to help secure the Ukrainians, volunteer to help, defend the Ukrainians, because that is not going to interfere with any of the actual tactical military cyber operations. And it's almost like, I call it planting a victory garden for defense. It's like back in World War II, there were lots of posters telling the American public, plant a victory garden. Why? Because there were food shortages, because we were at war, because there were shortages everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So it was like a patriotic thing to plant your own food so that you weren't straining the supply chain and everything. What I think of in cybersecurity is, what can the broad population do? Not go after some sort of uncoordinated attack like vigilante, unregulated militia kind of activity, but actually take it to a place where you are making it harder to attack the country that's being attacked, right? So I think that, what Ukrainians are doing, Ukrainians should do. What outsiders should do is they should help defend Ukraine, is what I think.
It's a
Cyber Alliance will really like this episode.
Excellently put, really, because
thank you. Yeah,
it's very hard to convince people that are trying to make impact, because they want it to be very they want a shorter feedback loop. They do not want to invest time and patience and persistence in doing stuff that will strategically affect the outcome of the war. They want to fight,
Well, now we have very authoritative and
with this argumentation, it will be much easier for me to argue about these things. Thank you.
Yep, and so we definitely don't want to want to make sure that Donecia doesn't hold you hostage. So we will be wrapping it up, trying to be mindful of your time. But thank you a lot for all of this. There is so much incredibly insightful things that I will be going back in the recording and like re-listening and trying to make some key points. So like really appreciate everything that you helped us find out. Like I said, learn from our colleagues abroad, and this episode I think just really nailed it. And also, just before we wrap it up, is there anything you would like to add, or is there any message you want to send to Ukrainian audience?
Oh my goodness. No, I started studying Ukrainian on Duolingo on my phone, a few months ago. So I was like, I was like, try and remember how to say goodbye at the end. Oh my God, my comms director made me practice it with her so I wouldn't embarrass myself. And here I am forgetting. No, I remember. Do probachina druzi. That's what I wanted to say. Do probachina druzi. That's it. Is like bye, friends. Right. So, and
yeah.
I'm just so happy to be on this podcast with you. I just want you to know I've said no to almost every single request for me, especially on camera. I know you don't necessarily, you have the thing streaming live right now, but I've said no just because, this pandemic has been hard for everybody, and I don't really like being on virtual. I feel like it's I don't know, it's draining to me in a different way than being in person, I'd rather give a talk to 10,000 people live than like one person virtually, because it's awkward for me. But I just wanted to say thank you for having me on this podcast. Thank you for, everything that you're doing to help support, Ukraine. And if there's anything that all of us can do, we're here to support. So thank you so much. And do probachina.
We immensely appreciate this.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much,
for accepting the invitation.
Okay, thanks.
And to our listeners, I do have like one final word, just like a reminder, please, the only way to support us is to support Ukraine. You can donate to Come Back Alive. You can donate to whatever other humanitarian aid organization for Ukraine, or, whatever any other support, it's always welcome. And thank you, Katie, again for being with us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.